I just had my first ever Facebook Live Q&A in my Camino de Santiago Solo Women's Facebook group to celebrate 1,000 members in the group. I figure, you guys might have these questions too and might appreciate this on YouTube, so I am reposting the video here. Bear with me for the, poor laptop webcam video quality, but thought this would be helpful for you and hope you enjoy. And if you identify as a woman or non-binary, you're also welcome to join this Facebook group. This is the #1 place I go to help and support other pilgrims on the Camino. I try to check in there every day unless I'm traveling without cell service. So I'll put the link for that below. Check that out and feel free to join us. Alrighty, well, thanks so much everybody for joining. I'm super excited to have our first Facebook Live, and this is my first Facebook Live ever, actually, if you can believe it. Probably pretty obvious with some of the tech issues, but I hope, the rest of this video works okay and you guys can hear me. But yeah, really excited. I can't believe we have 1,000 members in our Facebook group now. I think I started the group, maybe it was back in January. I've just always loved the Camino ever since I hiked my first Camino on the Frances from Saint Jean Pied de Port in 2023. And then earlier this year, I did hike the 2 Portuguese routes from Porto. Just really am passionate about the Camino and want to be able to support you guys however you can. So I'm happy to have this Q&A here. And, if you all find this valuable and would like more of these in the future, let me know. And, definitely happy to consider doing more of these when I can, when I'm not traveling. I'll just go ahead and dive in. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. Of course, if you have other questions that come up that you want to share in the chat, while I'm recording this, definitely feel free. And, as time allows at the end, I'll go ahead and answer any additional questions. All right, so let's see. The first question is from Bennett, who says, I am planning on leaving Saint Jean Pied de Port at the end of April and staying in Albergues. Would you recommend a sleeping bag or liner? So I think for that time of year, I would recommend a sleeping bag. I haven't personally hiked at that time of year, but from what I've heard, other pilgrims have been glad to have sleeping bags then. I know there was another woman in this group who hiked, I think maybe a little earlier in April, and she did use one. I think, since you're going through the mountains, especially at the beginning, and just I think that time of year can be a little colder. Just to put it into perspective, when I hiked the Portuguese routes earlier this year, I started a little bit after you. I started on May 9th, but there were a couple days where I felt like I was a little bit cold with just my sleeping bag liner, and I felt like, maybe in the future if I hiked again, especially in May or in April, then I might want to bring a sleeping bag. So that's what I would say. A lot of the albergues do not have blankets, and if they do, they're kind of gross. Especially if you're a germ freak, and I definitely am myself, and I had to use a few of those blankets, and it just kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. I would go with a sleeping bag. I haven't actually used a sleeping bag on the Camino at all, so if anybody does have recommendations on a bag that they think is good for the Camino, feel free to share that here. I would think something that's like more of a summer kind of sleeping bag that's not meant for like super cold temps would be fine. So the next question is from Lynn. She says, total newbie and just researching, and totally okay, Lynn. I know there's a lot of questions and, kind of a lot of overwhelm when you're first researching the Camino, especially if you've never done something like this before. And she says, when itineraries list kilometers per day, is there room within that to stop and smell the roses, take breaks, stop for lunch, etc.? Is it just a matter of staying on track, or is it head down and go? I'm debating self-guided or guided at this point. So I love this question. I think this is a great thing to think about that honestly I wasn't thinking about before my first Camino. And I would say in general, these itineraries, do leave room for you to, like you said, stop and smell the roses, really enjoy the time on the trail. And I would encourage you all to do that. I will say I'm not familiar with the tour companies specifically, and especially that guided tour. I don't know how that works. So you may want to reach out to those folks just for more specifics on that. But generally, I would say, these itineraries do allow you to stop during the day. And just as an example, a lot of times when I'm walking on the Camino, I'll stop at least once for breakfast. Sometimes I'll have a second breakfast if I'm really hungry, or, if I'm just getting small things. Then I usually do stop for lunch, and sometimes I'll even stop for other breaks during the day to like get an ice cream or get a sports drink. So yeah, I think there should generally be time for that. I think the one exception, and it probably doesn't apply to you, Lynn, as much, but for those folks who are going on their own and not booking accommodation with like a company, I have found, at least for me, there's usually at least some days where I like to try to show up at an albergue when it opens and, get a bed and I don't have a reservation in advance. And, that's kind of usually how I recommend approaching that. You want to generally show up when they open just to be one of the first people there and hopefully get a bed. So on those days, sometimes I've felt a little rushed, especially if the albergue opens earlier in the day, like 1 p.m. or something. On the Portuguese routes that I just walked, some of them would open at like 4, but then some would open at 1. And on those 1 o'clock days, I did feel a little bit more rushed, like I didn't have as much time to stop. But yeah, I think if you're booking ahead of time, and you're not walking like a super long distance, there's not really a huge rush. And I really do recommend that everybody take at least some breaks each day and like take it easy. You want to A, enjoy the experience, but then B, I think it's just a lot better for your body. When you're hiking such long distances day after day, you don't want to be like pushing full throttle ahead. All right, and then our next question is from Debbie. Do you suggest any particular workout training schedule to start getting ready now? So that's a great question, Debbie. I love that you're thinking about this already. Some people don't train for the Camino at all, and you don't necessarily need to, but I definitely think that everyone should. Like, you're just going to be better off the more that you can prepare your body for this kind of thing. And I mean, I will say I don't think anything can fully prepare you for the Camino. Just walking for hours and hours every day on the trail is like very hard to simulate at home unless you just have a ton of time on your hands. So I do think the Camino can still have its challenges, but yeah, whatever walking you can do now in advance to prepare is great. And I would say, just in terms of a training schedule, I don't have one that I know about that I can recommend at this time, but I'm actually working on building one. If you do have any questions about training more specifically or anything you'd want to see in that, definitely let me know and I'll kind of try to work that in. And I can also, let me pull it here. I have a link to a wait list I set up so that you can enter your name and email. And if you are interested in getting this training schedule and plan, when I have it ready, I'm hoping sometime early next year, but I'm not sure. It kind of depends on my travels. But yeah, if you sign up for this, I'll send you an email whenever it is, about to be released so that you know. Let me just pop that in now. And then I will say, just in the meantime, in terms of training, just like generally my thoughts on it are to, start small. You don't want to overwhelm your body and overwork it with too much too fast. So usually I think I would say maybe try to walk like 2 or 3 miles like every few days. I think that's about 3 to 5 kilometers for you, those of you who use kilometers. And then just slowly increase that over time, like maybe by 10% max, like each week. You don't want to overdo it, and definitely listen to your body. And I think I would maybe build up like on the weekends, maybe try to do a bit of a longer walk or a hike, and then kind of think about maybe your tentative Camino walk and what would be maybe like your average day, like in terms of the length of walking, and maybe kind of try to build up to that. And I think as you get used to walking too, and in your training, at some point it's a good idea to try to start walking with your backpack on too and put some weight in there, just so that your back and your hips and everything can also get used to walking with that kind of weight. So I hope that's helpful. I know that's a very general answer, but like I said, I am working on that training guide and plan because I know that's, I think it's really important and really helpful. And I know that's something a lot of folks are looking for. So stay tuned for that. And again, if you have any thoughts on what you want to see in that, I really, want to make this as helpful for you as possible. So anybody who's interested in that, definitely let me know what would be helpful there. All right, and then Debbie also asked, do you find eye masks and earplugs necessary in the albergues? So I would say that's really a personal preference. I do think for the most part, albergues, they are going to be filled with pilgrims, who are on a similar schedule, like probably going to bed early, getting up early, and they're generally pretty respectful of other pilgrims. These typically are not places where somebody's going to be going out like partying till 2 a.m. and, waking you up. So I do think that is nice. I think the one exception might be if anybody is maybe like staying at a private albergue in like a coastal town during like a busy holiday season. I could maybe see there being, just holiday goers there. But for the most part, the albergues will just be pilgrims. But I will say, you can't expect to hear snoring. You can't expect in the mornings to hear people like kind of rustling around as they're trying to get their packs together. So I think if those extra noises bother you, it's not a bad idea to bring an eye mask and earplugs. They're pretty lightweight. They're not going to add too much to your pack. So I would say go with them if, you think you're going to be bothered. Personally, for me, I'm like a super deep sleeper. I did end up using earplugs on part of my Camino last year, just like the free ones that I got from my flight to get to Spain or to get to Portugal. And they worked okay. Like I feel like my ears don't work with the earplugs very well, but I did actually appreciate using those. So I might bring them myself on future Caminos too. All right, and then the next question, Debbie asks, my bestie and I plan to walk the Camino Primitivo. Oh, how fun. I would love to walk with my bestie. During the last week of May and first week of June, how soon should we book our airfare from the US to Madrid and Oviedo? So I just looked this up a little before this because I saw your question, and I feel like I'm always delayed with my travel planning and probably not booking at the optimal time, but I saw the Points guy, if you know him, he writes all about like airline travel, and he had a really helpful article talking about when he recommends, I guess, when it's theoretically best to book. And he said for Europe, he recommends around 5 to 8 months before. So yeah, since you're going the last week of May, I guess I would just kind of start looking at flights soon if you can, but know that you have time, and you could maybe even set up, like if you know your dates, you can set up in like Google Flights or other websites like the flight alerts so that you can get emails like if the price drops. So that might be a good idea. And if you need help doing that, just let me know. I can kind of walk you through that and how you can set up those alerts. But I would just kind of start casually looking now and book sometime, I guess, within the next few months. And then in terms of Oviedo flights, I don't know if you're trying to fly straight from the US to Oviedo, or if you're going to spend like a day or two in Madrid first. Feel free to let me know. Debbie, I know you're here. I think the comment chats, like the chats are a little delayed, so if you're telling me already, I may not see it for a bit, sadly. But I think if you're flying to Madrid first and gonna like hang out for a bit, you can probably, like, it's not as urgent to book your travel onto Oviedo. I mean, I would say definitely give yourself maybe at least a month or two before you leave, like get that secured. But I think there's even a train to Oviedo, I want to say, too. So there should be, I mean, Madrid is such a central location, there should be multiple options for you to get there. But yeah, I would look maybe like a month or two before for that, but that wouldn't be as urgent as just booking the bigger, like, international flight. And then I see you also asked, how far in advance do the albergues take reservations? I'm thinking of doing a combination of albergues and private guest houses, but have not yet researched the accommodations. So if anyone has suggestions, I'd love to hear them. So yeah, I'll speak from just my general experience with booking albergues. I have not done the Primitivo route specifically yet. I really want to do the route. I may do it next year also if I have time, but I would say generally private albergues, in my experience on the Frances and the Portuguese route, it's fine to just book them sometimes even the day before or like a few days beforehand. If there are any that you end up seeing later that people are like, oh my God, this is one of the best albergues on the Primitivo, like everyone has to stay there. If there's anything like that, that's like seems like a really special albergue, I would book that sooner. Just as an example, there was one I really wanted to stay at on one of the Portuguese routes, Casa da Fernanda, for anyone who's watching who's going to walk one of those routes. And I kept reading about how everyone said this is like one of the best routes on the Camino, or one of the best albergues on the Camino, like you have to stay there. And I had no idea how far in advance it booked. And so I didn't end up getting a spot. And I met ladies who stayed there in May of this year and they booked it in January. So if there's anything like that on the Primitivo, book in advance. But otherwise, generally in my experience, you're fine within like a few days. I would also maybe, there are some great Facebook groups that are route specific too. So you might also ask in the Primitivo group just to check, just because I'm, not familiar with that route specifically, and I know it can vary a little bit. And then I know you asked about private guest houses. I imagine those do book up a bit sooner than the albergues, just, since it's more of a private space. So I don't fully know. That would probably be a better question for the Primitivo group as well. I've never booked something quite like that on the Camino. So yeah, I would just probably give yourself a little bit more time for those. And then, let's see, Janine says, would love feedback on the Kula cloth and if it is something to look into. And yeah, Janine, honestly, I've been researching the same thing myself because I've been looking into some backpacking gear for some other trips I'm going to be doing, and it seems like people do really love the Kula cloth. Personally, I decided I think I'm just too much of a germ freak that it just like weirds me out having something that's, you've been using that is on your backpack like flapping around, but I know it like from what I've seen, it kind of like folds up, so it's not going to be really touching anything. And yeah, people do really love it. So I will say on the Camino, just like the bathroom situation, so you're aware, there will be days where there's plenty of bathrooms for you to stop at, but then there will be days where you might have to go, in the woods or behind a bush. And usually for me, I just kind of like drip dry, and I mean, at least I'm like, oh, I'll be taking a shower in, a few hours after that. But if that bothers you, then you might want to consider the Kula cloth. It might be a good option. Or you could just do toilet paper and then like put it in a bag. But I feel like I would prefer personally the Kula cloth over that, just for hygiene and like convenience and, all of that. So those are my thoughts on the Kula cloth. But if anybody here has used it and has thoughts, feel free to share those too so Janine can hear some feedback from people who are actually using it. And let's see, I think those were all of the pre-submitted questions. So if anybody has any other questions, I'm going to try to refresh on a different window just to see if any more questions have come in on the chat. Okay, Debbie, now I'm seeing you're saying we'll fly to Madrid and hopefully to Oviedo the same day. Okay, so in that case, I feel like I would try to, just look at the flights that are with Oviedo as the endpoint and Madrid will be your layover. I think that's totally fine. And I mean, I've never been to Oviedo myself, but I've heard it's a really cool city. But then that way you can kind of like rest there and enjoy that space and not have to have like another travel day before your Camino. I feel like that's a good plan. So really excited to see what you think about it. I've always wanted to go. I've heard Asturias in general is an amazing place. I studied abroad in Spain back in 2015, in southern Spain in Sevilla, but my host mom always said that Asturias is the most beautiful part of Spain. So yeah, I've heard the Primitivo is just lovely, and excited to see what you think. All right, and then I see Emily says, when it comes to travel insurance, Orbis Ways does provide this. I assume it's probably the minimum you should have. Do you suggest to purchase more on the medical? So I'm not familiar with Orbis's plans, Emily, and I think there's also just like strict kind of like legal stuff on like I can't really recommend you a specific insurance. So yeah, I think there's only so much I can say there. I think it's really just up to you and what you feel the most comfortable with. So yeah, I mean, I always think personally it's a good idea to have some kind of medical insurance when you're doing something where you're, doing physical activities and, on the Camino you are walking alongside roads sometimes, which, usually is fine, but like I did have one friend who had to kind of like dive out of the way of a car on her first Camino and ended up like breaking her cheekbone, I think. I don't want to scare you guys. That is very like rare and not happening often, but like anywhere in the world stuff can happen. So I always personally feel better having some kind of coverage in place. I know at one point I was seeing all these news articles saying Spain was requiring medical, like health insurance when you're traveling there. And I think I even posted in this group saying like, this is a new thing, you're going to have it. But then I saw since then Spain has clarified that you don't necessarily have to have it. Like they're not going to fine you if you don't have it, but they recommend people have it. So I think it's really just, a personal preference there. But yeah, sorry, I don't know too much about Orbis's plans, but maybe I'll look into those. And let's see, does anybody have any other questions? I'm going to refresh my screen again just to see if any new ones have come through. Okay, cool. I don't think I see any others. So yeah, this was fun. I hope that you found this helpful. And of course, I'm always hanging out in the Facebook group. I'm here to help and support you, whatever you need on the Camino. So, don't hesitate to reach out there with questions. I usually try to check that once a day if I can. I will be traveling soon in December. I'll be sharing an announcement on that soon, but even then, I think when I'm traveling, at least as long as I have cell service, I'll be in that group. So happy to help however I can, and wishing you the best rest of your week, a good November, good holiday season coming up, and yeah, happy, I guess, buen preparing for the Camino. But yeah, thanks so much for joining. Thanks for being part of this group, and looking forward to chatting soon.